So today I'm really excited to have Ann Bolton with us. As I mentioned, she and I used to work together when I was at Virginia Tech, and just a really wonderful colleague, always someone who brings a lot of energy and excitement to any project and is just really, really great at her job. So I'm just excited to have her here to share some of her expertise. So Ann joined Virginia Tech's annual giving team in October 2019 as the associate director overseeing broad-based campaigns. She became director in June 2021 and now oversees all campaign types, including Giving Day. So she's going to let us know how we go from 900,000 to 11 million next year for our Giving Day. She has the secret ingredient she's going to share with us. And prior to joining Virginia Tech, she spent more than a decade working at Penn State in alumni relations and annual giving. So she brings a lot of experience to this topic, and just excited to have her here. So I can turn it over to you, Ann, and please feel free to take it away.
Thank you, Lindsay. That was such a nice introduction. And I remember when Lindsay let me know that she was leaving her role at Virginia Tech, I remember writing back and saying, oh, so sad for our loss, but happy for your gain at the foundation. And also told her, if there's ever anything you need or you want to talk about annual giving, just hit me up. Be happy to chat with you. So here I am. So it's exciting to be here. So again, I'm Ann Bolton and I work at Virginia Tech. I want to just start with a basis of annual giving as a level set for everyone on the screen. I love your questions, and I'll work through those as I'm talking this morning, but encourage you to raise your hand, unmute, jump in and ask a question, or give an example of something you're struggling with and you want to work through it with the group. I'm happy to pause and bounce around and talk about anything that you might have on your mind. So when I talk about annual giving, I usually say it's that foundational fundraising unit that collects a lot of very small gifts from many, many people. And it's about the impact that small gifts can add up to a big difference. And you all saw that on your Give Local Day just a few weeks ago, just the collective impact of the community coming together, small gifts, large gifts, all of that adding up to this huge impact for the New River Valley. So that is the basis of annual giving. And I tell my team a lot, we need to get someone to give, get them to give again, and then get them to give more. So it's about building this habit of giving, making sure people feel good about their relationship with Virginia Tech or your organization so that they want to keep giving back, and also educating them that gifts of $5, $25, $50 make an impact just as much, if not more, for the future of the organization than some of the larger gifts that we might see come in. And I think sometimes people get wrapped up in, I can't give $1,000 back to the organization, and they don't understand that their $50 or whatever they can give really does make an impact. So thinking about that from a standpoint of the stories that you're telling when you are doing some broad-based campaign solicitations, what is the impact of the collective groups from your donor population for the organization now and then potentially in the future? Someone had asked a question about timing and planning for annual giving, and I thought that was a good place to start, because annual giving is all about the planning, really, and just looking at your 12-month schedule over the course of the year and deciding where there are windows that you could capitalize on this annual ask. And it doesn't have to be often. It could be only on Give Local in June, and then your audience will learn that that is the time that they can rally and support your organization. Another really good time, if you have space for 2 communications, would be in the November, early December timeframe, as people are thinking about their calendar year-end gifts for tax purposes. I will say we did see a little bit of a drop in our calendar year-end giving when the tax law changed recently. There was such a nice, and some of you may have experienced the same thing too, but for a couple of years, people could claim their gifts and their philanthropy on their taxes. And now we don't have that same luxury. So anyway, things can change over time. So anyway, that's still a good time to be doing some outreach to talk about making that gift. And it can be, we typically start with it being storytelling in the early phase of those communications. And then as we get to maybe the last week to 10 days of December, it becomes transactional. Time is running out, make your gift, make an impact, that sort of thing. And those could be digital. If you have email addresses for your donors, those can be completely digital campaigns. If your budget has room for some sort of paper mailing and you feel good about the addresses that you have, you could send a mailing. And there are some local print houses. We use Bison Printing pretty often at Virginia Tech to help us. They're local, relatively local, and we like to be able to support them, and their costs are extremely reasonable for all sizes of mailings, small to large. So something to consider there. And then you also could be as simple, if budget is a problem and you want to send something paper, you could send a postcard that simply talks about what you're trying to achieve with this giving campaign. And you could include a QR code as well as the URL typed out, but that people could click the QR code. One thing that COVID did for us was bring the QR code back, which was sort of dying before COVID. And now they're everywhere and people know how to use them. And it's integrated with phones for the most part. So we have seen a lot of success converting donors via a simple postcard, which is much less expensive than a full letter with reply device, return envelope, and all of that. So something to consider there as you're thinking about what your schedule is. And I also know that there's time is a big factor here too. We have limited amounts of time and all cover a wide swath of responsibilities. So thinking about that annual campaign and making sure that you can schedule in planning and preparation time around that is smart too. If you have a big event in early December, it probably doesn't make sense to try to also at the same time be doing some sort of annual campaign, because something will have to give and you'll want that big event to be what your time and attention is focused on, or if it's a big grant deadline time frame or something like that. So there is no right or wrong time frame for an annual ask. It really all just depends on what your 12-month calendar looks like and where you have space to execute something. So I will pause there and see if anyone has questions or scenarios they might want to talk through.
I think one thing we hear sometimes is sort of the cadence of like how you space out ask for donors. And I imagine you'll get to that, but that's something that we hear when we're talking with folks about Give Local, of people saying, well, we just had a campaign in May. I don't know if I really want to push something in June for our size organization. So just would love to hear more about your thoughts on how to space it out.
Yep, absolutely. That's where I was going to go next. Under the context of thinking about being consistent with the timing of your annual appeals. And so we typically will leave like 2 months in between our big campaigns. If we have one going in July, the next one would go in September, and then again in November for the pillar campaigns, what I would call the ones that are your more traditional annual giving. Might be a direct mail piece. It could be a series of emails. And if it's one that's directly email related, we might send an email every week for 3 weeks as part of a fundraising window, just as a reminder. Or we might do email and then we have a postcard that's scheduled to hit their mailboxes the next week. And then the following week or 2 weeks later, we might hit them with a little reminder, last chance email or something like that. We try to utilize email and digital tactics as much as we can, because more and more people are moving to giving through those mechanisms, and they're paying less attention to the mail and taking action through the mail. So a lot of our older generational demographic likes to give via mail, but some of the younger folks really will only respond to a postcard with a QR code that they can scan. They don't have checkbooks. They aren't writing out checks. Some of them don't even know how to write checks. So just thinking about your audience and your donor demographics. If you have an older donor cohort, you may want to think about prioritizing mail. If it tends to be younger, you can prioritize electronic communications or postcards or something like that that might capture their attention in a different way. But you don't have to do it every 2 months. If you did something in the fall and something in the spring, and you were consistent with the time frame, your donor audience will learn in early November, they're going to receive a communication for you or whatever that time frame is to give back. And then in the May-ish time frame, June time frame, they're going to hear again, maybe some save the dates about Give Local coming up. So they're getting amped up and excited about this, and then being present and paying attention on the day to give back to your organization. Lindsay, do you offer an early window for Give Local?
Yep. Early giving starts on June 1st, and then folks have basically the whole month to fundraise.
Perfect. So that's a great opportunity to do some outreach to special donors, even board members. Some people had asked a question about what is the best practice for having an engaged board of directors. So the early window could be called a VIP phase. So we'll segue in now to board things. Does anyone have any other questions on consistency or timing of solicitations? Did that answer your question, Lindsay?
Yeah, for sure.
So with board members, they're your best advocates. At least you would hope they would be. If they've been invited to be part of your board, there was a reason that person was selected because of maybe their interests in the organization, or maybe they have a business connection that's important to your organization, or they're just a great person who is like happy to go out and talk about your organization. Whatever the case might be, board members can be really good ambassadors for your organization. And a couple of ways you can engage board members for your Give Local. Of course, they could be asked to support the organization in the early giving window. You could also ask them to collectively or individually provide a challenge or some sort of match gift as part of it. If the organization raises X number of dollars, they'll match that amount or what have you, so that you can add a little bit of gaming into the system. When I was on a board for a women's resource center back in Pennsylvania, there was a regular cadence where at a board meeting, it was probably quarterly, I would say that was about the time frame, they would pass around a list of donors who had lapsed with their name, email, and phone number. And board members were asked to go through and review the list during the meeting and then initial those people that we knew that we were willing to reach out to ask them to either participate in something or renew their support. And so we were given a little script to take along with us so that we had some language to use if we were uncomfortable with that kind of outreach and what to say in there. But we were encouraged to initial like 1 to 2 names on that list. So they didn't ask us to make 5 or 10 phone calls. Some people did because they were excited and knew a lot of people on the list. But for someone like me who didn't know a ton of the donors in the community, I could always identify at least 1 or 2 people who I was familiar with enough to make that kind of phone call. And sometimes I got the person on the phone and could chat with them. Those are my favorite ones. And otherwise, other times, if I got their voicemail, I would leave a message. But that's another way you could engage board members in helping to move your organization forward, is in looking at some of those lapsed donors. Or if it's a volunteer-based organization, it could work in the same way. Some volunteers who have sort of fallen off can do some outreach just to see if they're still interested in volunteering or being involved, just to understand why they may have stopped. It could be time, it could be whatever the case might be, but it's always good information to collect just to understand what the general vibe is with your constituents out there in the world. And then the other piece with board members is to tap into their areas of expertise based on their hobbies, if you know what they are, or their professional work, whatever the case might be. They may be able to lean in without charging anything to help coach or help you move your organization forward just based on what they do every day. So that's always, it's never hurts to ask. They might say, no, not at this time, and no is just a not right now. Just like when you're asking for gifts, if someone says no, you try to understand why they say no, and then wait till the time to come back to ask them at a later time. So it's always good to keep that dialogue open with board members. Does anyone have a specific issue with their board that they want to talk through? Who makes up most of your boards? Like, what are the types of people?
I can share one thing that we hear sometimes is, board members are offering their time. So why should they offer that additional money? And so I think part of it's education, but and also sometimes, if you're not super experienced with fundraising, it can be a little nerve-wracking to ask folks for money. So I think sometimes that's a barrier.
Mm-hmm. And I think the more you can normalize that conversation around the impact of philanthropy, a lot of times, and you're right, Lindsay, I'm giving my time. This is a sweat equity thing. I'm not going to be giving my treasure, I can give my talent and my time, but not my treasure. And I think it's important just normalizing those conversations about you could use the Give Local as a great example of how the community is coming together to support the organization and what the organization can do with that money. And the more you talk about it and tell stories and even bring donors, some of your key donors who may not be board members, into board meetings to talk about why they give back to the organization. Why is it important to them? Most people will come and share their story, and that can help ease that awkwardness of, hey, I'm just volunteering my time for this. I'm not going to give money. But once you start hearing those stories, or you have maybe someone who's a recipient of philanthropy through your organization will come and tell their story. That's even deeper impact of how what the organization is doing is truly making a difference for that person in that community. Those stories told over and over again make it much less awkward. It takes some time to build that up if there isn't a culture of giving back within the board, but it's a nice subtle way to bring it in to help the board members see exactly what what your organization is achieving and doing for good, and then also makes them feel a little bit more comfortable about this idea of giving and possibly asking others to give, or at least talking about their involvement with the organization and asking if some of their friends or colleagues would consider participating in Give Local or in giving back to this particular campaign. They can be your best advocates if they're willing to tell a story. When they hear stories, then they have stories to tell. But yeah, board members can be tricky sometimes. Sometimes your best partners, sometimes you wish they would just expire out and come back. There are those people, you all know that. See some chuckles on the screen. Okay, and then there were some questions about new donors. So new donors are hard to acquire if you are constantly working within the same database of donors that you have. So a great opportunity, and hopefully you saw this on Give Local, is an event like that, where it is a time where you may be advertising more. You could encourage your loyal donors, board members. You could arm them with some social posts, some simple images, and some sample copy that they could pop out on their Facebook or Instagram and just say, hey, I shared the platform. Does the platform allow you to say I gave to whatever? Yeah, okay, so you could encourage them to share that they gave and then include a link for other people to give. And it really is just a slow, consistent, and patient grind with bringing in new donors. And then once you identify that someone is a new donor, the stewardship is really important. The stewardship for all donors is very important. However, when it's a new donor, acknowledging that this was their first gift to your organization, and even having some stewardship or thank you copy that acknowledges that and just shares your appreciation and recognizes that they took an action for the first time, and that means a lot. And then they'll feel, and then I'm sure they get added into any sort of newsletter you may send out or any other kind of communication that goes once someone enters. They kind of always just stay within the framework for different communications. And so they will now hear they've been acknowledged for taking their first action with your organization. And then they begin to hear good news about the work that you're doing and the impact of gifts. And then when the ask comes around again, they're more inclined to repeat that because they felt good about their interaction and that you paid attention and noticed that they did something for the first time. And then for your repeat donors, making sure that you acknowledge that to some extent too, if you can. If it's someone who's given 2 or 3 or 4, 5 years in a row, language about your consistent support of the organization means a lot. And you can even get crafty in your databases. If you know how much someone gave the year before in a communication to them, you could use merge functions and merge in a suggested amount slightly higher than what they gave previously in another communication. One thing to think about is when a donor makes that 4th gift, it takes 4 gifts for someone to build that habit with your organization. So you want to be paying a lot of attention to the first time, second time, third time. And once you get them to give that 4th time, they're pretty much locked in and will continue on. So we pay a lot of attention at Virginia Tech to those 1 through 4 retention groups. Once they hit retention 5+, we have like an 83% retention rate for that segment, which is unbelievable. But that is the proof. And you see it's a little bit smaller percentages for the first year retention, second and third, but it builds year over year. And then when they get to that 5+, they just do it. Like you probably don't even need to ask. They'll just do it. We still ask them because you don't want to miss that opportunity, but they will just do it. And they'll do it at the time frame that they typically do it. Some people are calendar year end. Some people wait for our giving day. Some people wait to get the letter from President Sands, whatever the case might be, or their college dean, depending on what strikes their fancy. So that is an important metric to be watching in terms of donor behavior, and certainly making sure that there are strong and timely stewardship communications that go out after someone has made a gift. And to the extent you can personalize it based on their behavior, that goes a really long way in having people feel valued and that they'll want to keep coming back and giving more. I'm just going to pause and look at my notes. Any questions?
And I have a question. It is text to give a good way to get new donors, and does that kind of limit you to a younger audience, or is there a good strategy to promote that to a wider audience?
That's a great question. So with text to give, it depends on the type of platform that you have. At Virginia Tech, we have a platform that is a basic number. I think it's 51555, and it goes out, and we can include a link. We can't really personalize it, but we can push it out, and then they can click a link and take action. If it's make a gift or whatever the case might be, they cannot text back. It doesn't support two-way texting. So with that particular type of platform, the younger audience unsubscribes at unbelievably high percentages because they see right through the fact that it's a machine and it's not really a person because it's not a number. So we have learned on very rare occasions do we include like a Gen Z or millennial audience in our broad text. It's only if it's maybe an event reminder of some sort, or a last chance to get something that we think they would want to participate in. But mostly we leave them out because once they unsubscribe from our texting platform, they're gone. We can't pull them back again. And we don't even know who they are because they hold that under lock and key. So we are thinking about moving to two-way texting. We just haven't gotten there yet from a technology roadmap standpoint. Two-way texting is a much more useful type of platform. It often has phone numbers that are 540 or whatever area codes are for your area. And they often function with some sort of dashboard so that you could have a couple of team members responsible for managing the text communication. So if you send, you can send a one-to-many text message and it goes out, there's usually more personalization available. So you can say, hi, Laura, and give your message, and then you can write back, and it just all comes into a dashboard where you can reply right there. And it looks like it's going back and forth it's coming up on their phone as a text message. So that is a great way to communicate. You can use it for stewardship. You can use it for event reminders. You can use it to solicit, whatever the case might be. To answer your question about new donors, you would need to have a way to acquire phone numbers for people who haven't connected with your organization, unless you have maybe a volunteer pool without giving that you can identify, but you have their phone numbers. You could use it in that particular method, but it's hard unless you have phone numbers of people that you want to target or reach out to see if they want to come back in. So it's probably a better retention strategy than a new donor strategy, but can be very effective depending on the type of platform you have. Any other questions? Are there any other topics you would like me to speak on? I've addressed, I think, most of the questions that came in one form or another.
Yeah, I think you did as well. And one that comes to mind for me is when you're sitting down to write that email or the letter, what kind of content are you thinking about for these kinds of campaigns?
Sure. I always start thinking about what I'm trying to achieve. What is the thing that I'm trying to request support for? And I'll usually start with some sort of reason why I'm writing. It could be because of their past support or whatever the case might be. And then talk about the problem that their gift will help solve. So we are raising money to build an XYZ that will enable these people to grow, or if it's Ronald McDonald House, provide these services to children in need or what have you. And I'll explain what that problem is and then talk about the next part of that. Like the third part would be what you're asking them to do. So make a contribution of X dollars, or simply make a contribution that helps us achieve this. And then a whole lot at the end about their gift making a difference, the collective impact of small gifts, that sort of thing. And then a thank you. Thank you for making a difference. Thank you for helping us to make this a reality, or whatever the case might be. And if you need to include instructions on how they should give, that can go in the section about make a gift of X dollars. Sometimes it's fun to have like a special dollar amount that you're trying to collect. Let's say it's the 65th anniversary of something. So you may want to say, give $65 to commemorate our 65th anniversary, or $35, whatever the case might be. And then in that section, provide instructions. You can give online at whatever the URL is, or return the enclosed envelope if it's a mail piece. If it's an email, include a link several times throughout that email message that will go back to the giving page. So you could have it, consider a gift of $25, have that hyperlinked, and then at closer to the end, your gift will make a difference, and you can hyperlink your gift back to the giving page as well. So that's showing up there. a couple of times. The other thing I do is look at the copy and identify 2 to 3 sentences throughout the piece that are the key sentences that are telling the donor what to do, like what they need to know, what to do, and why it matters. So usually it's 3. And that way, if the donor reads nothing but what you have bolded, they understand what that message is. And we'll do that in emails as well, so that it's clear what we're trying to accomplish and what we need this person to do. And then you could also go a different route and have a benefactor of the services tell their story and make the ask too. That just says, you know, your generous support has enabled me to receive X, Y, and Z, or my child to receive this service or whatever. I'm grateful for the organization and what they've done for our family. If they're willing to sign their name to it too, that can also be compelling. Go ahead, Laura, you unmuted there.
Yeah, I was just going to ask a stupid question. In that letter, do you bold sentences that are important, or is that kind of screaming to a donor?
No, I bold them. That's what I was saying. I wouldn't do all capital letters in the letter. That sort of signifies yelling, but absolutely bold sentences to highlight what your message is, so that if they look at it and they only read what you've bolded, they know exactly what they need to do and why.
And I think maybe related to that, I know one of the things we struggle with at the foundation is there are so many different things that we do and that people can give to, that it's hard sometimes to explain succinctly. And any advice you'd have on sort of how to approach being clear when there's a lot of different ways to support the cause?
Do you, when you send a solicitation, is it say on foundation, community foundation, like letterhead, so to speak, if you're going to mail it, or if you email it, it's branded for the foundation? And then you could be going to donors who have supported one of 30 different organizations in there, and then you're asking them to give to that? Or do you keep it more general of like, give back to the organization that matters most to you?
So we have, like, it's always branded community foundation, but we typically are soliciting for the fund for the NRV, which is just our big general fund.
Gotcha.
And that funds a bunch of different kinds of projects. So when we're trying to figure out like what do we want to focus on, that, it funds things in like early childhood and food assistance and nonprofit leadership. And sometimes it's hard to be succinct in that message.
Mm-hmm. Where my brain was going, and you may already do this, is depending on how often you are sending communications out, I would always try to find, maybe there's 3 areas that you might highlight throughout that letter with some short paragraphs. So just like you said, early childhood, that sort of thing, food insecurity, whatever the case might be, you can give a little snippets of how the fund has supported each of those 3 types of areas. Maybe don't call out a name of one, but just some examples and a genre of organizations, how that fund has made an impact. And then you could even use that, depending, some organizations need more money to really make a difference. And so you could use examples in whatever your ask array is in that communication. If you're asking for 25, 50, and 100, you could have a $25 example, a $50 example, and a $100 example that ties to some of the categories of the organizations that you're working with and supporting. And then you can change that each time you're sending a communication out. And I don't know if you go as far as, if you know what the person has supported before, and in their reply device, you're listing those there as well. It could show that they would at least draw the connection between the community foundation is like supporting such a broad swath of organizations, and they know my behavior and what I've supported before. And so it makes it easy for them to choose that area if they want to support the same one. And although no, you're saying your general fund. So you would always just have your general fund there, and then they could give to that, into that bucket that would then support the greater cause.
That's helpful. Thanks.
I'd say the most important thing to think about is be consistent with the timing and the cadence of your annual giving type solicitations, because people will learn that rhythm and they'll begin to look for it to show up. Make sure that you are thanking donors in a timely fashion as they are making their gifts, or sharing the impact of a particular campaign or an effort in a timely fashion as you're working on the stewardship piece of it. And the more you can keep them connected in, and it's okay, perfectly okay to ask donors to help advocate on your behalf as well. Ask them to help spread the word for Give Local or a particular campaign you might be running. They might know other people in their networks who would like to support the organization and would be willing to put something out on your behalf. That's probably, that ground game is probably the best way to acquire new donors if you aren't buying lists and sending out mass mailings to certain communities to talk about the services that you offer. That, of course, is another way that can be very expensive depending on where you live and the piece that you're sending out and how many households you want to reach within that particular effort. But that can be a helpful way as well.
And how do you all approach goal setting for these campaigns? I think that can be hard to sometimes figure out what's too big of a goal or too small of a goal, and then sharing a goal. And if you don't meet that, it's just, I find that tricky. And would just love to hear your thoughts there.
Yeah, it's very tricky. And I think it's important to determine, do you have a participation goal? Are you looking for a certain number of donors to come through for this campaign, or are you looking for a certain amount of dollars? And once you determine what that is, then you can back it up to what your strategies are. At Virginia Tech, we are participation focused in annual giving. So we are looking for alumni to give back to the university. And we have a goal of between 20 to 22% alumni giving each year. So we know what that number is based on our alumni base. And then we know, we take a look at our 12-month calendar, and we're a July to June fiscal year. So we look at every month and determine what activities, what solicitations, what fundraising things are in play each of those months, and then set goals based on where we need to be, say by December 31st, then we'll like back up in the fall to figure out what those months need to look like. And then we know where we need to be by June 30th. So we then split things out, obviously knowing January is a pretty quiet month, so we don't put a big donor goal in there. And then we were, every day I am looking at donor numbers and donor counts just to see where we are tracking towards our goal. This past fiscal year, FY23, with some of the recession in play, it was extremely stressful from a participation standpoint, because what had happened the year before did not repeat for 1 month the same way. And some of our pillar campaigns that are driving thousands of donors fell short by 20 to 30%. So every month we probably were 1,000 to 2,000 donors behind this entire year. That is extremely stressful when it's a presidential priority and you know, and you're on the Board of Visitors dashboard that you have to hit a particular goal. We hit it, we did it by June 30th, but it was stressful. And so if it's revenue, it would be that same approach for what you would want to achieve, and look at what kind of revenue do you need to raise from, I'm sorry, my dog is barking at someone, from the broad-based constituent of donors, and then look at how many, like what your campaigns have done in the past, and figure out if that's enough to get you there, or if maybe you need to add a little bit more, or even think about investing in digital advertising or something like that to help get your word out a little bit more broadly. It's quiet now.
No, thanks, Anne. That's great. And I think sometimes we see this a lot with Give Local, working with our different nonprofit partners of trying to choose that goal. And sometimes I say to people, like, you might want to under promise and over deliver and do a smaller goal, but have the goal mean something and not just pick out 20,000 because it sounds good. And I mean, that would be amazing. And sometimes that can be motivating for donors, but maybe your donors aren't there yet. So it's helpful to hear your approach as well.
Yes, yeah, and you can look at what was done in previous years of Give Local, and then also like increase it a little bit depending on what you think is possible. And if
Lindsay, while we have a moment, can we go around the screen and see if people will introduce themselves?
Sure,
We
yeah.
have some new people, I think.
Yeah, we do.
That's for sure.
Ramsey, I think you're unmuted, but would love to hear a bit about you and your role with I think you're with the German Club.
Oh. Hey, that's correct. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
I found out about the webinar through our relationship with Leading Lights, which kind of grew out of the German Club years ago. And I'm just coming on board as the new executive director for the alumni side of our operation. So sort of liaison between the students and our alumni base and the school. But I'll be coming into that role over the next couple of months. And I'm a 2000 grad from Virginia Tech, and happy to be back in Blacksburg and getting connected with some of the resources here.
Nice. Well, welcome back.
Thank you.
Welcome home, as they say at Virginia Tech.
Exactly.
No worries, Ann, and always something going on when you're working from home. We were just going to do quick intros because we have some new folks. Alex, would you like to go next?
Sure. I believe I've been on these a few times, but I work with Brain Injury Services of Southwest Virginia. While we're based in Roanoke, we actually cover all of Southwest Virginia, from Kentucky all the way over to Lynchburg. We cover about 16,000 square miles, I believe.
Wow, that's great. Thanks, Alex.
Sure.
Don, would you like to go next? I feel like you're our coziest participant today, and I'm jealous of your office setup.
Yeah, decided to enjoy the hammock today. So, yeah, I'm Dawn Gifford. I am we're new Havenwood Equestrian Center. We just started up this year. So,
And you all did great with Give Local this year. It was great to have you.
well, thank you. I was pretty pleased for our first time. I thought it went pretty well.
Absolutely. Elizabeth, would you like to go next?
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Underwood. I'm the Executive Director for New River Conservancy. We're a 3-state organization, but the biggest part of the New River is in Virginia, in the New River Valley area. We participated in Give Local the past couple years. I've been the Executive Director for 2 years and a couple months now, and my background is higher ed. I started off with an alumni association and did fundraising, annual funds, and then I shifted to government relations, but 20 years in higher ed and now a couple years in the nonprofit sector.
Nice. Thanks, Elizabeth.
can I jump in for 1 second? With your background and you were listening in today, is there anything else you'd add to the organization? You have a great blend of knowledge. Anything else you'd like to add today?
Thank you. You know, as I was listening to this, I was also typing on a screen, and we have a new communications director who's actually on her honeymoon this week. So I said I'd participate and take notes, but what I started doing is just a comprehensive timeline. And I think what you said early on about, think about that 12-month plan. And so I'm happy to, if we have time, I could share my screen and just kind of show you what I was thinking. But essentially it starts with, you know, in January, sending Lisa up to, can everybody see my screen? Did that work? Sending Lisa up to to see our planting season, to see why does it matter, and get those statistics. You know, how many live stakes are we planting in the ground? How is that funded? For $5, you know, you can plant 10 live stakes that creates better water quality, you know, just really getting that content. So starting in January and then getting the postcard in the mail in time to get it to our board meeting in May, so we can do that live bunt, side bunt outreach and having it hit the mailboxes by the end of May. So by, you know, June 1, whenever it goes live, we're ready to go. Lisa came on board at the beginning of May this year, and there just wasn't enough time to really onboard and create that plan for Give Local. But I think this illustrates, like, when do you start planning for Give Local? Pretty much July 1 after last year's, and creating that 12-month plan.
Thank you so much. That's so true. We start planning for our giving day pretty much the week after it ends. It's really depressing. Like, you just do a little celebration of your achievement, like, okay, let's start talking about how we do this again next year.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But I think that conversation is so important to have as soon as possible afterward, of at least talking about lessons learned and what you might want to do differently and documenting it, because otherwise you're just going to forget. And so quickly, Lee, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Lee Sweevel, and I'm the executive director of Beans and Rice. We have 2 offices we work out of, a small one in Radford, and our main office is in Pulaski. But we serve people from all over the New River Valley, so that's kind of our thing. We have multiple areas of focus for our organization.
Thanks,
I
Lee.
don't want to take up more of our
No, you're good. I'm sorry for doing this backwards. I could have done this at the beginning. So thank you, Laura, for bringing it up. And last but not least, in terms of our nonprofit partners, Lorraine, would you just want to share quickly?
Yep, Lorraine Blakemore, the Director of Community Engagement at the YMCA at Virginia Tech. And for those who don't know, there is no pool, there is no gym. We're service-based, working very much with the students at Tech in leadership positions to provide essential services to the community.
Thanks, Lorraine. I know we're running short on time, but I figured it might be one more question that came to mind for me was when you, and when you think about how these, the annual giving asks fit into all the communication you all are doing with your constituents, how do you think through sort of updates to donors that aren't necessarily a direct ask, or at least keeping people in the loop about what's going on in your organization, so it's not like complete darkness and then you pop out of the woodwork and say, hey, do you want to give to us? And how do you all approach that?
Yeah, we include soft asks in almost everything that we do. So if there is a newsletter that our alumni communications team is sending out that might be highlighting some upcoming events or sports teams, research projects, whatever the case might be in that particular newsletter, at the bottom, there's usually something that will talk about giving back, or they'll, in part of one of their stories, there will be a link to give to participate in something, which may have a gift component as part of it, or like give to support something if it's a crowdfunding campaign that has a cool story. I know we worked with the autism clinic at one point during the sesquicentennial with the College of Science. That was their themed campaign. So we would, in general alumni communications, talk about that campaign going on and include an opportunity to give to that particular area in that campaign. But as often as we can, we do include, even if it's very general, if you're interested in supporting Virginia Tech, click here or whatever the case might be. So it's there again, normalizing the conversation about giving back in everything that we're sending out. It may also show up in some stewardship communications for a cohort of alumni donors who we think would be great recurring gift donors. That's probably a topic for another time to talk about recurring giving. It's such an important way to have a foundation of support year over year. But we may include that as, hey, did you know you could set up a recurring gift and can, make an impact every month? We may include that in some of the stewardship communications that we send out, as well as some standalone solicitation campaigns to drive recurring giving. But that's another way that we keep it on the forefront. So Maureen, your hand's up. Yay. Oh, you're on mute.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, with you mentioning, your soft ask throughout the year and your newsletters and that, I always put a donate now button after parts of it, but where do you think it's best within the newsletter? And this may be a silly question. Should it be at the top? Should it be at the middle? Should it be at the bottom? Should it move around? I don't want it to be the first thing that people see, but I don't want them not to scroll,
Yep. So you can move it around. It's always good to keep changing things up. Some time of year, maybe if it's a fall newsletter, you want it at the top because giving is top of mind sort of in that November, December timeframe as people are thinking about their year-end philanthropy. Probably makes sense to have something prevalent and in a June 1st timeframe. If it's a link to Give Local or something like that, could be at the top. And then if you're telling a story about something that you're fundraising for, you could put it right there with that article, and then maybe again at the end as just a subtle thing, but not at the beginning. So just look at the content of your newsletter and where it makes sense to drop in a donate now button. It could be at the top, depending on what you're pushing, could be in the middle, or it could be a couple of times in the middle. Around stories that you're telling, and then otherwise it could be at the end too.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I know the hour went by really fast, but I just really appreciate you all being here, and thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise. It's always a pleasure to see you and just hear everything you have to say. So thanks everyone for joining. We'll be posting this recording and you mentioned recurring giving. We would love to have you back to talk about recurring giving. I think that would be great to talk about sometime. So you might hear from me again on that one.
Sounds good.
Well, everyone, thank you so much, and hope we see you next week at our event at the Moss. I hope everyone has a great rest of your week.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, everyone.